What expertise did you have to start your own company?
I had no expertise.
So why did you get out?
I said, look, I can't even program my VCR. You've got the wrong guy.
Now, the U.S. government has most of its gold in Fort Knox.
I believe large gold bars, or at least that's the way it looked in Goldfinger.
What made you interested in Rembrandt?
It spoke to me, and I said, Mommy, please take me back to the Rembrandt.
Okay. What is it that you think makes a leader?
The longer that I live, the more I realize that character is really destiny.
Would you fix your tie, please?
Well, people wouldn't recognize me if my tie was fixed, but okay. Just leave it this way. All right. I don't consider myself a journalist, and nobody else would consider myself a journalist. I began to take on the life of being an interviewer, even though I have a day job running a private equity firm.
How do you define leadership?
What is it that makes somebody tick?
Where are you from originally?
I was born in New York.
And your father was a business person, or?
My father was a businessman, and I lived in New York until I was 8, and then moved to Florida.
So you wanted to reduce your taxes, you moved to Florida, is that why you moved?
I was very precocious.
Right, okay.
I knew at 8 that capital gains taxes were best paid in Florida.
Okay. You went to high school at Le Rosey, which is one of the most famous boarding schools in the world. It's in Switzerland. And then Oxford, you got an undergraduate degree and a PhD.
Yes.
In history?
Yes.
In what type of history?
The undergrad was in what is called modern history, which by English standards means when the Romans leave Britain.
So when did you move back to the United States?
So what happened was, as I was working at Oxford on my thesis, I took a business trip to Israel, and a 6-day trip. A lot can happen in 6 days in Israel, and the 6-day trip turned into a 6-week trip because I met the girl who would become my wife, and we've been together for 30 years since then, the entire time. Ultimately, I got interested in commodities and went off and started my own company.
Where were you living then?
New York.
Okay, so you were starting your own company, but what expertise did you have to start your own company in the business world?
I had no expertise.
Okay.
And there was really no reason to give me any backing. Fortunately, my first foray was in silver in 1993. And the zeitgeist was that silver was going to go down to $2 because digital film would supplant silver halide. I believed that people got the analysis wrong and that silver had a better chance of going back to 50. So I put my money on silver options. And silver went from $3.50 to $5.50 in relatively short order. And I made enough money to decide that I didn't want to do that anymore, but I would take all that money and put that on buying an option on a silver property.
Well, let me make sure I understand. Where did you get the money to buy the options?
I started with $10,000.
Okay.
So I had, a little bit of savings and turned that into hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then put the money on a property in Idaho. And I realized around that time that I really didn't have very much competition. And so I took whatever money I had and I went to Peru and Bolivia and Mexico, and I would put down options on these properties. After a certain period of time, I found that I had as interesting a portfolio of option properties as any existing silver company. And I knew that even though I wasn't ready for prime time, even though the story was a little bit flaky and delusional, a New York-based financial type with no background in engineering or geology, starting a mining company, I kept it low-key, but I was introduced to George Soros. And he and his brother Paul invested in me.
And how old were you at this time?
I was 32, 33.
Okay, and you were married then?
I was engaged.
Engaged, and did your fiancée say, what do you do for a living?
Oh, no. She was instrumental in the entire process. When I had the vision of buying silver mines, it was in the middle of the night, and she was at NYU. She'd left the Israeli Air Force and was studying at NYU. Apparently at 3 o'clock in the morning, I sat up in bed and said, please write this down so I don't forget it, buy silver mines. And so the next day, Daphne said to me, by the way, last night you told me to write down buy silver mines. So I'm reminding you, but I'm also going to add this, that is so sexy. And so I went into the silver business.
Wow. So
She has unerring insight.
okay. So how did it work out?
I found that it suited my aptitudes to take that money and buy assets and hold those assets. Having a historical bent allowed me to see the market through the prism of history. And so when you see these cycles and you understand human psychology and fear and greed, the history gives you a great perspective. And so if you own the assets and you don't go into debt, it really becomes a function of time before you become fashionable again. And we made a huge discovery in Bolivia, and that's where the fortune originated.
Did you ever visit Bolivia?
Many times, I loved it.
So why did you get out? Usually people, when they make money in something, they say, you know, I'm smarter than everybody else. I'm going to stay in this and keep doing it. It's like going to Las Vegas and gambling.
I retired from the silver company when it came time to build it. I said, look, I can't even program my VCR to build the biggest mine in the history of Bolivia. You've got the wrong guy. Let me go. And so they said I could. And so I went into platinum and got lucky and went into hydrocarbons in the early 2000s. And that's where we had our biggest score, actually, in East Texas.
And what did you know about oil and gas?
Nothing.
Nothing.
But that was already a very good pedigree in terms of what had happened previously. I felt that oil, which was in the high teens, and which again, the conventional wisdom was that oil was going to go back to a normative 12 to 15, maybe under 10 again. My view was that oil was going to go to 100. So I created a company called Lior, named after our 2 children, and we went prospecting in East Texas. And again, as in Bolivia, got really, really lucky with what we found.
So oil and gas went up around that same time?
Oil basically went from 18 to 100. 100 was my target. We hit that in 2007. And so we sold the energy company in November of 2007.
So after you sold, did you say I should retire and not do anything else, or what did you decide to do next?
I've been a failure at retirement. I wanted to retire at 40, and then I came up with the idea of the energy company. When we sold the energy company, I briefly thought of retiring, but oil was at 100, 120, and gold was at around 650. And I was a believer that we were going to have an economic crisis, which is why we sold in 2007 the platinum and the oil, because they were economically sensitive. And I wanted to go into an undervalued currency and felt that gold offered the best risk-reward proposition.
So when you got into gold, it was roughly $600 plus or so an ounce. And today gold is trading at?
Almost 1,300.
Now the US government has most of its gold in Fort Knox, or all of it there?
Most, I would say.
And what form is it in? Is it in jewelry, or is it in little gold bars, or how does it sit there?
I believe large gold bars, or
Okay.
at least that's the way it looked in Goldfinger. So that would be my closest
Okay.
approximation. We never lived with our paintings.
Where did you put them?
Museums. It gave us more joy knowing that these paintings, which were in private collections, were all on loan. And so we created a lending library, and we lent these paintings anonymously, only the museums knew.
So let's talk about another part of your life, which is art. You are the owner of more Rembrandts than any other individual.
We have 16 Rembrandts.
16 Rembrandts. And Rembrandt painted how many paintings?
Approximately 350.
What made you interested in Rembrandt? Rembrandt's a great painter, but there are a lot of great painters.
I fell in love with Rembrandt as an artist when I was 6 years old, when my mother took me to the Metropolitan, and I encountered Rembrandt for the very first time, and it spoke to me, to use that cliched expression. There was something about it. I can't possibly imagine that I was that precocious to understand his insights on the human condition. But nonetheless, whether it was the chiaroscuro, the contrast of light and dark, whether it was the intensity of the inner life, it spoke to me. Yeah. And from that time on, every weekend, we would go to visit Rembrandt.
Now, did your mother say there's something wrong with my son who's focused on Rembrandt? There aren't that many 6-year-olds who are focused on Rembrandt. So did she ever mention this to you as being unusual?
She voted with her feet. So probably after the 10th or 12th weekend that we went to visit Rembrandt, she said, I think it's time for me to broaden his horizons. And she took me to MoMA.
Okay.
And I remember encountering a white canvas with a red line across it. And so she says, I was missing my 2 front teeth. Apparently I crossed my arms, shook my head, and I said, Mommy, please take me back to the Rembrandt.
Okay.
And we were back to the Metropolitan.
Okay. So when you were successful in business, you said, now I can afford to buy some Rembrandts. Is that right?
No. Self-knowledge is it's a journey. So I never intended to become an art collector. In fact, when my wife's mother, Mira, who's an artist, said, you really should become an art collector. You're a historian, you love classical art, and perhaps it was because it was my mother-in-law, but I said to her, I will never become a vulgar materialist. 3 months later, Daphne and I were embarked upon a buying spree that was roughly, on average, 1 painting a week for 5 years.
Now, Dutch paintings?
All Dutch, Golden Age, Old Masters.
Now,
yeah.
Golden Age of Dutch painting was in what years, roughly?
In the 17th century.
Were they more modestly priced because people weren't trying to buy Old Masters at the time you were doing it?
Well, we clearly found that there was a vacuum in the marketplace. What we loved was undervalued. We were able to buy masterpieces of Rembrandt for less than the price of Andy Warhol's. There are 70,000 pieces of Andy Warhol. There's one collector who has 10,000 of them. So when you compare the scarcity of the Warhols with the Rembrandt, we didn't collect in that area because we felt that it was good value, but we collected because people allowed us to be able to take advantage of the fact that we had that rapacious method and taste.
Now,
and so we took it.
When you're buying Rembrandts, you don't want a lot of people to know you're buying them. It might drive the price up if people know you're the buyer. So how do you mask the fact that you were the buyer, or did you not mask the fact?
For the first, we began collecting in 2003. And for the first 13, 14, 15 years of our collecting, we were anonymous. We never lived with our paintings.
Where did you put them?
Museums. We felt that we were taking them out of the private domain, and that it gave us more joy knowing that these paintings, which were in private collections, were all on loan. And so we created a lending library, and we lent these paintings anonymously, only the museums knew. And so people really didn't know who was behind the collection, and we liked it like that.
So today your collection is called the
Leiden Collection.
And how many works are in it?
About 250.
And have you lent them to places like the Louvre?
Sure.
And does the Louvre take a lot of American artists or collectors' works? Is that very common?
No. We had our, as it were, our coming out party at the Louvre in 2017. We were persuaded that we should put all of the scholarship online and make the academic and the scholarly attributes of the collection available to curators, students, historians, dealers, collectors. But we also knew that the trade-off was that we would lose the anonymity. So that was our Rubicon. Once we decided to do that, we decided, okay, let's also have an exhibition of some of the pieces from the collection. And we started with the Louvre with 30. The collection can't be replicated. Literally, the numbers, it cannot be done. I mean, the next largest collection of Rembrandt has 2 paintings in it. There are only 35 or so in private hands. And this is basically as large a collection as the largest national museums. So it's a responsibility that we have to be able to find a way to advance the cause of helping Rembrandt have another 350, 400 years of relevance because we believe that he's the most important painter who ever lived.
Well, I'm a trustee of the National Gallery of Art, and we'd be always happy to talk to you if you ever had any interest in the National Gallery. Do people call you up all the time and say, guess what, I have a Rembrandt, but I don't want people to know, and sometimes it's a fake?
The paintings that they usually call me about are not really fake, but they are after Rembrandt, school of Rembrandt. They're not really Rembrandt. On occasion, the ones that I love the most are when people come to me and offer me paintings that we already own.
What is it that you think makes a leader?
The greatest quality of leadership is character, and the greatest quality of character is genuinely understanding why you're leading people to do something and giving back. Cicero said that gratitude is the greatest of all the virtues and the mother of all the rest. I have no doubt that that is the key.
Let's talk about another subject that's passionate for you, and that is tigers and cats.
If I have one passion, which is even greater than Rembrandt, it would be wildlife conservation. As a family, we have a very strong affinity for the belief that we have to give back to the environment. I mean, it's a fact that human beings as a species are effectively parasites on the planet Earth. Our great passion are the big cats. It's something that has fascinated me from the time that I fell in love with Rembrandt, from the time that I fell in love with history. Basically, all of my passions date back to between the ages of 6 and 12. I had a dream that if I was going to go into business, one day I would be able to pivot back to this first great love and to enable the great wildlife conservationists who did have those aptitudes so that they would be able to save the species that we love. And that is what led to the creation of Panthera, which is the only global organization solely dedicated to the conservation of big cats, their critical habitats, and working with the people who live with both of them.
Big cats are lions.
Lions, tigers, jaguars, snow leopards.
Right. What is the basic problem that is likely to lead to their extinction?
The real threat to the big cats is that cats need a wide range. They need lots of land, they need protein. And when you have human encroachment, first of all, it means that they have smaller quantities of land, the prey density shrinks, and unfortunately, there's a propensity for human-animal conflict. Lions can be very dangerous in close proximity to people. So you've seen the population of lions shrink by 90% over the last century. A lot of that follows the shrinkage of land in Africa, but it's the same with tigers.
So you are obviously involved in many different things, and what is your greatest passion of all of the things we've discussed?
The area which moves me the most is wildlife conservation. Environmental philanthropy maybe makes up 2%, 3% tops of global philanthropy, and most of that is dealing with global warming. Very few people actually give to the conservation of species, and I genuinely believe that the greatest psychic gratification that I've had is knowing that there are certain species that will not blink out, at least in my lifetime, because of the efforts that my wife Daphne and I have made in this area.
So what would you like your legacy to be?
When people describe me, either behind my back or to my face, the word which is most often used is passionate. And until relatively recently, I never thought very much about that word. I assumed everyone was passionate about something. And I've come to realize that most people are fortunate if they're even passionate about their children. To the extent that I am passionate about being able to use art as a way to build bridges, to save endangered species, to try to give back to the study of history, I think I'm very blessed. I won't be able to shape my legacy. The only way in which I deserve to have a legacy is if I manage to move the needle in any of those areas where I've been able to bring my passion to bear.
So you've been a leader in many different areas we discussed. What is it that you think makes a leader? What are the skill sets?
The longer that I live, the more I realize that character is really destiny. And the more that I've experienced human interaction, the more I've come to believe that the greatest quality of leadership is character, and the greatest quality of character is genuinely understanding why you're leading people to do something and giving back. Cicero said that gratitude is the greatest of all the virtues and the mother of all the rest. I have no doubt that that is the key. That is the beginning of happiness, to embrace that concept.
So let's conclude with two final passions you have. One is three-piece suits. Where did that passion come from?
About a year before my bar mitzvah, I had my first three-piece suit. And being someone with an affinity for a relatively conservative outlook, not conservative necessarily in the sense of what we call social or political, but I prefer present happiness to future utopia. And I haven't changed. And the beautiful part about it is about every 3, 4, 5 years, I become fashionable.
Okay. And the second and last passion we'll talk about is the 92nd Street Y.
So the 92nd Street Y has always been a home to every race, creed, belief, as an area where we have elevated discourse, where we are open to the arts, and where we provide a venue where people can come and engage in that greatest aspect of our democracy, which is genuine conversation held in an elevated and tolerant spirit. I view philanthropy as being certain concentric circles in New York. The 92nd Street Y is my home. I love it. I'm always deepening that relationship, and it goes out from there.
Tom, I want to thank you for a very interesting conversation and impressive life, impressive contributions to humanity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David.